that was used when Walnut Terrace was first built in the 1950s. So we'll start here. Where are we now? We'll talk a little bit about my history. I'm a native of Raleigh. We'll talk about from slavery to Reconstruction, where housing was, how the city began to grow and change. We'll talk about the Black community growth, and then we'll talk about the Black community's destruction, and then we'll do a tour of Raleigh, so we'll see a little bit about like what affordable housing looks like right now. This map over here is from 1971, so parts of the city that you see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but where downtown, not downtown Boulevard, but where Martin now is not here on this map. That had not been done yet. All right, a little bit about my history. My parents, Bill and Cliff Wimberly, got married in November of 1958, and this house on the upper right-hand corner was on Overland Road at that time. They lived in a room upstairs and had use of the kitchen when they moved in. That didn't work out very well, but that was what housing was affordable to them at the time. So they moved from there to the picture on the left, the second from the left. That's part of one of the original parts of Washington Terrace, which was an apartment, one of the first apartment complexes built in 1951 for professional blacks black families in Raleigh. They moved from there to this duplex that has now been converted to a house on Southeast Street. And they lived there until I was, I guess, 4 or 5. And then they moved to Durham. My father was a pharmacist. He had a drugstore in Durham, and They moved back to Raleigh after urban renewal destroyed Hayti community in Durham, and he had a drugstore here in Raleigh at the corner of Blunt and Lenore Street, and we lived on Idlewild Avenue until I was 8 or 9, and then after looking for a house for 4 years, uh, they bought a house in on Sandia Drive off of Bridge Road, and were part of the first wave of black families to move into all white neighborhoods. So that's my history. I live in the Oberlin community now, which has been gentrified. And I do want to say this apartment, this duplex, this brick duplex, is part of the gentrification of our southeast community that was purchased and turned from two affordable apartments into a house. The house that they lived in originally on Oberlin Road has been torn down and is in the process of being replaced with apartments now that will not be affordable for those people who are in lower income brackets. So, housing during slavery. Um, the picture at the bottom of the screen under the words is the slave quarters at the Stagville Plantation in Durham. The house on the bottom right is the Stagville Plantation original home. That's the Benahan Cameron house. The Stagville Plantation was part of, or the main part of, the Cameron Plantation. The house at the top right was the Mordecai Plantation, which was home of another member of the Cameron family. The Cameron Plantation had about 30,000 acres of land. So while it's situated, we think of it as Stagville, situated in Durham, it actually came all the way across to Wake County, and it was considered the largest plantation of the Mississippi. and they owned at least 900 slaves that we know of. When slavery ended, former slaves from that plantation and some freedmen um, built the community that is now known as Oberlin in Raleigh, North Carolina. Um, and so Cameron Village Shopping Center and the Cameron Village community was named for that slave owning family. In 1792, when Raleigh was established as the capital city, the city boundaries were laid out in a 1 mile radius. The streets were named North, South, East, and West Street. Those streets are downtown Raleigh now and are still being used. In some of my research, I found that Raleigh was considered to be crisscrossed by creeks and watersheds, so it wasn't necessarily the driest area, but it was kind of central, which is why it was chosen to be the capital city. Had moved here from Newburgh. And as a result, I'm quoting from some research now. As a result, the high hills, the long ridges, and dank bottoms characterize Raleigh's terrain. The antebellum residents, who were those people who were the slave owners and owned the plantations in the area, because of reasons of health and aesthetics, chose the higher sites for their homes. The low-lying areas were for industrial development or they lay vacant. After Reconstruction, which is after slavery ended, the Freedmen's Bureau came to Raleigh, and the freedmen settled in the areas that were east of South Street, so down in this area, or south of South Street, east of East Street, south of South Street. Sorry. So this area here at the bottom of this map is where blacks settled, and this was the Oberlin community. And I will say to you now, Oberlin, what we know of Oberlin today is split. So Oberlin went from Hillsborough Street all the way out to Glenwood Avenue, and it was on both sides of the street. And that's not what we see or know of or think of today as the Oberlin community. Because of poverty, obviously you had poverty because people were coming out of slavery. They didn't have any money. They weren't given anything when they came out of slavery. They were promised, but they weren't given. People who had made money and did have some money to purchase land were still only able to buy the less expensive land. Now remember, the city itself is in this area right around the Capitol, 1 mile out on either side of the Capitol. So as people were buying the less expensive land, it was usually in the creek bottoms or less desirable locations because the white families had chosen to live in areas that were up on hills, that were not in the lower areas that would get a lot of water because of their health needs, and it was prettier. And if blacks could not purchase, then they would rent in those same areas because that was where it was the least expensive place to live. When white property owners would divide their land and sell it, they created black majorities in those neighborhoods, and those segregated trends still remain with us today. Eventually, there were 13 black settlements in the Raleigh area. 4 were created before Reconstruction. Lincolnville, and if you ever drive out Chapel Hill Road, you will see the Lincolnville AME Church. That is the area where Lincolnville was. That eventually was destroyed because NC State bought some of that property, or took some of that property. I'm not sure how that happened. Brooklyn, which was near Devereaux Farm and in between Devereaux Farm and St. Augustine's, which would be the area where Capitol Boulevard and Peace Street are. Also became known as Smoky Hollow in a later iteration as a mill grew or was built there, and housing was provided for the folks who worked at the mill, and that was black and white people. Um, Masonville was an area that was annexed, brought into the city, and became Method and Overland. Those were the four areas built before Reconstruction. During and after Reconstruction, these were the neighborhoods that were built. Hungry Neck, which was downhill from the Capitol, right in here. St. Petersburg was this area off of Hargett Street, around Moore Square. As you can see, the lots, the areas were long and narrow. Cotton Place and Idlewild were divided by New Bern Avenue, but they all came out of plantation owned and property owned by Mr. Cotton. So right here in this area would be where the Department of Motor Vehicles is today, and Bojangles. The old fairground area, which is here. Hayti, which would be back over in this area. And that, if you are familiar with Washington Elementary School, that is over in this area. Cannon Lands is not on this map. The Manley Homestead area would be back down over here, right before you get to Hayti. The Smith Haywood area was closer to Shaw University. The lots, as you can see, were much larger, and quite a few white people did live in this area, including the Daniels and the Bagley families, and then the Wilmington Blunt area. So a book was written by Dr. Wilmeth A. Carter, who was a professor at Shaw University, called The Urban Negro in the South. This book was written in 1961. And these are a few of the things that she studied. She studied trends and sociological trends and that kind of thing. And so a lot of her book talks about Black Main Street, and she uses Raleigh as her subject matter. And she had a lot of personal interviews in her book. The book is not in print anymore, the original version, but if you're interested in it, you can get it at www.forgottenbooks.com. It's called The Urban Negro in the South. She says that Raleigh's cluster of housing was different than many areas because of the number of Black educational institutions we had here. So we had Shaw University, which at that time, after Reconstruction, was the largest college, Black college in the country. At that time, Shaw also had Leonard Medical School, Leonard Dental School, had a law school, and a pharmacy school. And then we also had St. Augustine's College at the time, and it was on the other side of the city. And so the largest cluster of Black people was in that part of the city between and around those two colleges. And so that was unusual because there weren't very many cities that had two Black colleges in them. And when you consider also that because of the pharmacy, medical, dental, and law schools, we had a lot of Black professionals who came out of those schools who determined to stay here and create their practices, their businesses, and grow their families. And there wasn't necessarily a lot of segregation because Blacks and whites were often neighbors in the communities because people would buy what they could afford to buy. And at the time, politically, Blacks were Republicans because Lincoln was a Republican, freed the slaves. They were able to vote at the time. And so that lasted for a short while. But whatever gains were made, they took advantage of those. So the original areas that were mixed eventually became all Negro. as she says. That's what we were called back in the 60s. And she said, when it came to where people lived, Negroes and whites bought and lived in the same areas. Wherever they saw land they wanted and could pay for it, they got it. That was a Black female teacher that she interviewed who shared that statement. These are some other quotes from the book. Oberlin used to be a colored community. Whites lived around the outskirts of Oberlin, but they were poor whites. Everything was Negro, and because of that, nobody bothered about us. The city wouldn't even fix up the streets or give us lights or anything else. But at that time, Oberlin was considered in the country. Remember, we originally said the city had a 1 mile boundary, north, south, east, and west. And so Oberlin was outside of that boundary area. In 1916, there wasn't a white person on any of the property. Then whites began to pay high prices for the property. Then they tried to run the Negroes out. Later, it was incorporated as part of the city. Now, not 1/8 of Oberlin Road is colored. That was the most desirable property in Raleigh, for it overlooks Raleigh. Whites paid them, Negroes, good money for it. That's why they sold it. One fellow got $50,000 for his property. This excited the Negroes. They hadn't been used to paying over $4,000 to $5,000 for houses. Honestly, I think we could change the date on that to 2016, and it sounds just like the gentrification that we see going on in our city today, and also in Oberlin. So some other facts I want to share with you. In the 1890s, half of the population of the city of Raleigh was Black. In between 1868 and 1901, Blacks were very active in the city. They were elected to alderman posts. They had their own fire and police, fire engine companies and police presence. And that was actually one of the issues that caused the change in government and brought the Jim Crow laws back, because white people did not like the thought that Black people could arrest them, that Black people would have the opportunity to have jobs that were paying well. And so that became a growing part of the discontent in the white community. The 3rd and 4th ward of the city were Black. There were, I believe at the time, there were probably 14 or 15 people on the board of aldermen, and generally there were 3 or 4 of those who were elected who were Black and Republican, and the Democrats at the time were white, and so there was still a majority of the board that would be white, but they did have to work together. So the 3rd and 4th ward were in southeast and southwest Raleigh. By 1910, the community of Idlewild was all Black. Smoky Hollow, which had been a mixed community of mill workers, which, as I said, was between Devereaux Meadows and around in that area, is becoming less mixed. Black housing began to, so there are, for those of you who don't know, this is something I had to learn, there are not just street maps, there are also insurance maps. On the insurance maps, after the Jim Crow laws started to come back in, the Black housing would be listed on the maps as Negro shanties or tenements. The written descriptions that they were given were terrible, and the descriptions of behavior in the community was terrible. So as more workers would live near their places of employment, they would often be given space to live in the rear of the property. And the descriptions of some of those places were small porchless shelters in the back of business lots lining alleyways. So if you spend any time in downtown Raleigh, we still have some streets that they're not streets or roads or drives, they are alleys. Battery Heights and College Park were the newest neighborhoods to be built. This map over here is actually near Washington School. This is the Walnut Terrace area. This map is from 1945. This was Mount Hope. As you see, it says here, Mount Hope Negro Cemetery. There was, the city cemetery was downtown, and it still is, and there were maybe 15 or 20 blacks who were buried in that cemetery, but most of the cemetery was for white. The black elites tended to live on streets near the colleges, public schools, and churches that were employing them. Also, the black elites tended to live near the downtown area if they were professionals. In 1910, we begin to see restrictive covenants go into sale of property. So these are the legal documents. So a contract to purchase a home that would prohibit occupying of the land by people of color. So these would generally say that the occupants was prohibited by Negroes or persons of mixed blood, except the servants. So the servants, a lot of servants lived in the homes of their employers. And you can still find these covenants in some contracts today in certain parts of the city. They are against the law, but if you live in some parts of Raleigh, you can still find those in your document. One of the kinds of housing that was considered affordable at the time, it was generally rental property, was called shotgun homes. You'll see these houses. These are the original shotgun homes that used to be on Oakwood Avenue. They have been remodeled and second stories added to them. But the reason they were called shotgun was because you could shoot a gun from the front door through the house to the back door, and it wouldn't hit anything. It just goes straight through. The houses were the width generally of one room. Um, sometimes there were double shotgun homes, so they'd be side by side, kind of a duplex. And generally there were only 2 or 3 rooms to the house. There were 2 major developers of these homes in Raleigh back in the early 1900s. One developer was black, one was white. Mr. Johnson, who was the black developer, built about 100 of these homes, and they were rental property. According to some recent research done out of New Orleans, the shotgun home design, which I will tell you a lot of black people did not like because of the feeling that they were shanties, they were a bad look, and they weren't well kept in most areas because they were just little, so they were not taken care of well. But according to some recent research, this design was brought to America by Haitian slaves because they were reminiscent of the Yoruba homes in West Africa. If you'll look at this picture, if you'll notice here on the corner of this house, the boarding has come apart. You can see holes straight through this house. And I remember growing up, because this is not far from Idlewild, and I did spend some growing up time there. I remember these houses, and people lived in them, and they were not taken care of very well. The white developer was a Mr. Gurley. These are some other housing pictures in Raleigh. This area, this is all southeast Raleigh. Some of these houses are abandoned, but these are what some of the houses, a lot of the houses look like when I was growing up. These is here. You'll notice these houses are up on stilts. In a lot of cases, these houses were up on stilts because water damage would be so bad, so you would need the house to be up off the ground so that the water could run under it. So that is an environmental issue that we've had to deal with over the years because of the segregation of our communities. By the 1930s, The federal government, because of the Depression, had put together a WPA project, and cities around the country were getting federal funds to build homes to help take care of those families whose homes were in such terrible condition. The first such place in Raleigh that was completed was Chavis Heights. I do not have a picture of Chavis Heights. The picture that I have here is Walnut Terrace, which was built later. So here you can see this is Wilmington Street coming into downtown Raleigh, and this was Chavis Heights here. I mean, this is Walnut Terrace. When Chavis Heights was completed, 295 families were housed in the complex, and there were 206, I think I read 263 apartments, but 295 families, and I'm not sure that was the information that I got. Halifax Court was built on the other side of town for those white families who were poor. A lot of those families had come out of the Smoky Hollow area. This housing where Walnut Terrace is, let me go back one slide. This housing, this picture to the upper right, this was where Walnut Terrace sat. So these houses were torn down to build Walnut Terrace. And this is the Halifax Court property. It was much bigger, and from what I could see, it was nicer at the time. So if you'll notice here in these pictures, I'm just talking a little bit about environmental issues here. The housing for in the black neighborhoods was down the hills. So this picture is, I believe, somewhere close to Memorial Auditorium. Memorial Auditorium was on the top of the hill, and the streets behind it were dirt roads, and the houses were built on stilts going down the hills. I cannot remember where this area is. This is also near the Walnut Terrace area, this bottom picture. And these are just maps from the 50s of what Raleigh looked like. So the next series of slides, or the last few slides that we have, are some pictures that I have taken, or places that I know people who have lived. That's what we consider affordable housing today. It's not by any means, what I'm showing you is not by any means the worst, but it's not where you and I would want to live, I don't think. So on the left-hand side, this is a series of pictures from 2011 to 2016 to what this house looked like last Saturday. Someone lived in this house until about a year ago. The porch was rotting in. The floors on the inside of the house it was not safe to live there. It was not safe to walk around in there. And the landlord did not want to fix the house up. This apartment is around the corner from the house. You can see here that it's not, the wood's rotted around the windowsill. Things are coming apart here. The door's torn. It's duct taped together. The windows not taken care of here. Inside, the plumbing was not fixed. There were holes in the kitchen floor. This is a mobile home park here in Raleigh. So the roof of this mobile home is covered with kudzu. So that's got to be causing rot, and it's just not a good situation. This is not well taken care of. It's broken. This one is not well taken care of either. These are all rental properties. Now, notice the contrast with the office for the mobile home complex. It's well taken care of. You can tell it's been taken care of, painted. This is a good sized mobile home complex here in Raleigh. This is an apartment complex. I've moved here. Here we've moved from South Raleigh to the Mini City area. So this is the damp in the basement apartment outside the door of one of the apartments. Um, the wet. So if you can just look here, you see the pipe, the drainage pipe for the water doesn't even come all the way down and go into that. And you can tell many of the windows are having water problems. This is clouded because of water, and you can see where the water runs down here on the wall, the outer wall. So, that's not healthy for whoever's living inside. You can see water dripping here on this apartment. We're back in Southeast Raleigh now. This apartment, the yard's not taken care of. This house, both of these houses are owned by the same person, but look at the side here. Look at all this mold that's growing on the side of this house. This house has been, it's rotting around the windows. You can just see that. If it's this bad on the outside, I can just imagine what it's like on the inside. These houses have been for rent for probably the last 30, 35 years. Because when I've been married 30 years to when we first started looking for apartments and houses, those were some of the places that we went to look at. And they were bad then. They're much worse now. A young lady that I was working with was living in this house in Southeast Raleigh. It's a boarding house, so she and her two boys had a room in this house, and they shared the kitchen. There were, I think, 5 or 6 rooms, and she woke up one day, and the house was surrounded by the police looking for someone, and the person that they were looking for was a friend of someone who stayed in the house, and she told that they stayed there. She had come here from another city because of flooding where she was living. So in the process, we got her out and moved her into this hotel for a couple of weeks while we looked for a place for her to live. This hotel, which is off of Capitol Boulevard, was full of families who did not have anywhere else to live. And we have several hotels in the city of Raleigh that are where people live because they can't afford to pay or to come up with what it costs to pay for first month's rent, security deposit. It can be well upwards of $1,000 or $1,500 to get into an affordable housing apartment if you don't have a voucher. And because of gentrification in Raleigh, we don't have near enough apartments or homes that are being rented that can use a Section 8 voucher. So one of the places that we went to look at was in this apartment complex, which is off of Bragg Street. And this picture looks very nice. I think I pulled it off of the Wake County government website. But when we went in, one of the apartment that was available was these used to be townhouse apartments. The landlord had cut the bottom apartment out to make an office, and only part of the apartment that was available was when you walked in the door was to go straight up the steps. The kitchen was at the top of the steps. It was hard to get past the equipment at the top of the step for the kitchen. And then there was 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and right here where the window is just a little not even a hallway, big enough for a folding chair, and that was to be the living room. And that rent was $800 a month. And there was so when you opened the door to go to the office or to the apartment, there was no door closing off the stairway, which was the entrance to the apartment. So she would have had to share that entrance. There would be no way to close off people from coming in who were going into the office. these are some. This house is near NC State, um, and it, as you can see, is not in good repair. Um, this is also near NC State. These houses are boarded up, but this is what some of the affordable housing used to look like. And then this apartment I just saw um, has been, um, I guess, renovated. It's a cinder block apartment, um, and it's $789 a month. Um, let's see. That's all that we have for you, but I'm certainly willing to see if we have any questions, see if there is anything that, any other information that people would like to share. Let's see what questions I see over here. So someone said that this is gentrification. Yes, this is gentrification. Um, and this is happening all over the neighborhoods that I mentioned and said were the Black neighborhoods. Someone says, do you think the gentrifiers of today are paying as good a price for the land they want as they paid in 1916? $50,000 for a property would translate to a huge number today. I don't necessarily think so. I live in Overland. I get my husband and our 25-year-old daughter get phone calls, text messages, emails daily. People asking, and it's funny because they say, I know this is a surprise to you, but we're interested in buying your property. But they don't want to pay for what the property is worth. And they really just want the land because they want to tear it down and build something up bigger. Let's see what other questions we have. The mobile home complex is in Southeast Raleigh off of Rush Street. So Wanda, we have a comment here that says, too often people in low wealth communities and communities of color live, work, or attend school near sources of harm, highways and congested roads, lead contaminated buildings, and hazardous waste sites. And that impacts the impacts of the toxic exposure are compounded by inadequate health care, limited access to healthy foods, and underlying health conditions such as asthma. And COVID-19 has definitely imposed a disproportionate burden of illness and death on racial and ethnic minority groups. Let's see. Tina Humphrey has a question. Let's see if I see that. I do not see Tina's question. Let me look, see if she put it somewhere lower in the chat. Oh, there. Does the city have a rental housing inspection program that will mandate owners to take care of their property? I think the answer is no. We do have housing inspection. We have a housing hearing board, but whether or not I don't believe they have any enforcement powers. And of course, that's something that we need. We have almost 70 people a day moving to this area. And a lot of them come here because it's a city and they assume that they can quickly find work and somewhere to live. And they don't know that the places where people used to be able to afford to live are rapidly being built up and bought and built up for those who are way past affordable housing limits. So in Raleigh, we talk about the average median income. So the average median income for people living in Raleigh, for a family living in Raleigh, is $76,000. It's $96,000. So 80% of that which is where we begin to talk about affordable housing, is $76,000, which is more than I have coming in as a retiree, a state employee's retiree. 60% of AMI is in the 50s, and people who are 30% of AMI or below, who are the people who need affordable housing the most, are making $28,000 or less and having to take care of a family. And there's just not housing for that group of people. Section 8 vouchers, which used to be helpful, a lot of landlords are not taking that anymore because they can sell their property or they can get much more for rent. I've had someone come by my house in the last 2 months to tell me that they had been living in an apartment or a house for 10 or 12 years. They had retired from the state, from the university, and there were issues that needed to be taken care of in their house. The landlord refused to and increased the rent, which eventually forced them to have to move, and they couldn't find anywhere else to rent for what they were able to pay there. And after they moved out, the landlord went in and fixed up the property and rented it at a higher rent than what he had raised the rent for them, and somebody's happily living there now. So these are the kind of things that are happening in our community, and a lot of people don't know that. And so when we think affordable housing, we think that we are helping the people on the bottom of the rung, and we really are not. So yes, those were things that need to be taken care of. So I see something else asking if there were a lot of apartments in there were a lot of apartments in Chavis Heights, and do I know how many people lived there and were displaced? No, I do not. There were, as I said, when Chavis Heights was originally built, it served 295 families. I do not know. They used a federal grant that is no longer available, called the Hope 6 grant. That's how the area where Halifax was redone as well. Chavis Heights and Halifax. Walnut Terrace was not able to get that kind of grant. So while all those places look really nice now, the cost of living there is much more. I will try to find out the answers to some of these questions. We've got about 10 or 12 more minutes. Let me see what other questions I have. Deborah, I will come back and tell you what next week's webinar is. So I do see here that the Housing Authority does regular inspections of houses in their program, but the Housing Authority doesn't have as many facilities to rent to people now. So Michael says, what recommendation do you have to City Council in order to protect low wealth residents from being forced out of their homes in favor of gentrification? Part of that is in our rezoning process. Our rezoning process needs to be changed. Our zoning laws need to be changed. And the city has taken a fair amount of property. If you look at the College Park area over by St. Augustine's College, now St. Augustine's University, I'm sorry. A lot of the vacant land that you see in that area was taken by the city because for several different reasons. Some of them, we do have some rehabilitation grants. In order to qualify for a rehabilitation grant, you have to have, I think, 2 to 3 of your major things wrong. The roof, your heating system, water system, those things would have to be replaced. Back when that program was originally started, and the city would send folks out to look when you would make application for the grant. And if they started to find other things wrong, the houses would get condemned. um, or taxes would not get, you can't, if you couldn't afford to pay your taxes because you needed to fix the roof that was leaking at your house, so people would lose their homes. So some of this is systemic. It is built into the laws and the processes and policies that we have um, in our communities. And this is Raleigh, but this is all over the country. And so things need to be, we have to go back and look at some things from the root of where they started. Uh, let's see, were plantation owners paid retributions by the government for their loss of free and enslaved labor? Yes, um, several of them were. Uh, and I don't know all of the history on that, but I do know that the answer is yes. Um, you said, I read what you said, Miss Barbara. You wrote retributions, you meant reparations. Yes. So when we hear of 40, 40 acres and a mule, by the time people were able to start to get that, that was taken away and given back to the plantation owners. Let me see. Let's see how I can do this. Um, will the bond money be used to save and maintain the small houses in Southeast Raleigh? I can't answer that. And the reason I can't answer that is because the bond money, we've not had a real spelling out of what the bond money, the affordable bond money is going to be used for. We see buckets. There's some money that we know is in the buckets, but we don't have a specificity from the city council or from the housing department in the city of Raleigh that tells exactly what will happen with the bond money if the bond passes. There are some rehabilitation funds. I will tell you though that the max that you can get for rehabilitation is $7,500. It takes $3,000 or $4,000 to fix your roof, so it's hard to, or that's what it cost me 3 or 4 years ago, and I'm sure that the cost has gone up. Um, so I bond money, there is a bucket that says some repairs, but we don't know what any of that looks like. And we don't know exactly what population of affordable these things are going to go to help. So there's nothing saying that people who are making $28,000 or 30% of the AMI are going to get this funding. I think maybe 10 million has been put in a bucket, but we don't know how that's going to be used. Here's another question. There's a lot of talk from people who are decision makers in the city about how they want to turn Dix Park into a world-class tourist attraction. How do you see this impact the city's ability to provide affordable housing, if at all? Um, hmm. Well, I will. This is not going to sound nice, but I'm only having to please myself when I'm talking right this minute. So this is not a comment from Wake County Housing Justice Coalition. This is a comment from Carmen. Generally, when a city is trying to change its image and become a world-class tourist attraction, they find ways to push the people who have the most needs out of the way. We saw it happen in Atlanta when the Olympics were coming. We see it happen. We've seen it happen in cities across the country. Um, People who want to come see something that's world class don't want to see the ugly. When you go, I said across the country, I'll literally say across the world. If you go to a tourist place, they don't show you the ugly. And it's ugly when you've got people who don't have somewhere to live. And that's so, my thinking is they will find some way to move those people out of the way. Um, I hate that, but that's what I think. Um, do you know what happened to the folks living in the Raleigh apartments downtown where they forced to leave due to development? Um, yes. Okay. So this says the rehab amount is about $75,000. The rehab for housing is $7,500. It's not $75,000. Who adjudicates the funds? There is no oversight board for how bond funds are spent or how housing money is spent. Um, the city council oversees, um, amongst all the other things that they oversee, but they leave a lot of things to department heads to handle. Um, Sir Walter Raleigh Hotel is being renovated as senior affordable housing using federal housing tax credits and historic preservation tax credits. All right. And the city of Raleigh put in $3 million. Someone asked if the person who asked about Sir Walter Raleigh Apartments was really talking about Winters Haven. And the residents in Winters Haven, because that was a private purchase, did have to leave. They were given a few months to leave. My children's babysitter was living there at the time, so they are gone. And if they have not finished renovating it and renting it out to gentrifiers, then they're in the process of doing that. Where does the Housing Finance Agency come in as far as keeping prices low and affordable? I believe the Housing Finance Agency. I'm assuming you're talking about the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I'll have to look that up. So that will be one of the questions we have to answer later. Let's see if I see any more questions. Okay. So, what should the city do to not only stop gentrification, but to give back so much of what was taken away from the Black community all of these years? One of the things that the city could do, the city has a lot of vacant land throughout the community. And instead of always tearing down the houses that are there, some of the money could go back into rebuilding and or fixing those houses so that they would be livable. Um, there are at least 158 pieces of property that the city owns that are big enough for a house or a duplex that they could work with some developers to build and have that taken care of. All right, someone has asked, do you believe Raleigh has done a disservice to its locals by bringing in new companies to build new housing that is unaffordable? That's two different questions to me. Do I believe Raleigh has done a disservice to its locals? Yes. Do I believe Raleigh has done a disservice to its locals by bringing in new companies to build new housing that is unaffordable? I believe the city of Raleigh could have done more to build in to bring companies in that would build new housing that is affordable. I believe the city of Raleigh could have done more to save the properties that were already here as opposed to just tearing them down. And the answers I'm giving you right now are still Carmen's answers. So this is not Wake County Housing Justice Coalition's answers as I'm answering these questions. The older housing could have been repaired before it fell into disuse. Why did that not happen? There has to be a willingness amongst the city leadership to put those kinds of plans in place. There has to be a willingness amongst city leadership to work with the community to find out what the community needs. And that means you have to go to the community and ask them. You can't always wait for the community to come to you. If the community is accustomed to being ignored, or there is a systemic, if the plans in place have been systemic for, what are we looking at from 1863 to 2020? If people do not think that the city is going to help them, and they're really literally trying to make their lives work, they don't always know to go, or they don't always have time or money or energy after 2 or 3 jobs a day to go to the city and find out what the city can do for them. So the city does for people that it wants to do for. So sometimes the city just needs to reach out, and it should not be incumbent on one person who represents a district to help that area. Okay. I think we answered that one. All right. In regards to focusing on Southeast Raleigh, and I think this is going to be our last question. In regards to focusing on Southeast Raleigh, why hasn't the city of Raleigh focused on redeveloping their low-income housing districts and reconstructing homes to be safer in the flood zones? I can't answer that one. So all the things that I cannot answer are things that we will take these questions and we will get the answers for them, and we will put them on the Advanced Carolina page. I'm going to ask you to give us a week to do that, at least a week. We have 2 more of these webinars coming. Someone asked me to talk about next week's webinar. Next Thursday night at 7 o'clock, there will be a panel discussion about the upcoming affordable housing bond. The panel will be split. 3 people will be in favor of the housing bond. 3 people will not be in favor of the housing bond. There will be a list of questions asked and answered, and the public will be able to ask questions. We would certainly like for you to, you have to register just like you had to register tonight at the same link. We would certainly ask you to share that with your friends, your family, other people that you know, your coworkers, because this is on our ballot. If you've already gotten your absentee ballot, then you probably already voted one way or the other. But if you haven't and you need more information, this will be the time to get it. So that will be at 7 o'clock next Thursday night, same link. And please share that with your friends, your frenemies, your neighbors, your cousins, your aunts and uncles, children, whoever you know who lives in this area in Raleigh, in the city of Raleigh, and will be voting. And we will get all of this information, these questions answered, and we will try to get them back out in a week's time, so that if the answers generate more questions for you to ask for the panel, then we'll be glad to take care of that. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining us today. I hope you've learned something. I know I learned a lot when I was doing research, and as my children say, I went down a rabbit hole, and I'm probably going to go back down the rabbit hole some more, because I love learning about where things happen, how things happen, and trying to figure out how we can correct some of the inequities that we have been living with for so long. Thank you again. Have a good night.